Welcome all to Biosimilars 101, an educational webinar on biosimilars. Today you will hear from a diverse group of U.S. healthcare leaders for important educational information on biosimilars, the next generation of lower cost medicines in the U.S. You will also have the opportunity to write questions in throughout the program for any of our speakers, and we will have a reserved time at the end for Q&A at the end of our webinar. So a little bit about me. I'm the Executive Director of the Biosimilars Forum and have spent a large portion of my career the last 20 years advocating for biosimilars around the world. I've been here at the forum since the start, being one of the original co-founders, and have previously been the president. But more important, let's talk about the members of the Biosimilars Forum. As the Executive Director of the Forum, I work to lead and coordinate our terrific 10-member companies shown here on anything from legislative outreach to regulatory strategy to alliance building and to teaching seminars and more. The Forum's top priority is to work with Congress and the FDA to serve as a voice for patients and to advocate for common sense policy solutions that give more patients access to life-saving, lower-cost biosimilars. Our members represent the majority of biosimilar makers in the United States and really around the world as well. Ultimately, we are about lowering cost and promoting access and bringing equity to the healthcare space through biosimilars. You will learn much more about how biosimilars do this through our program speakers, who I am honored to introduce today. Our four speakers today represent the FDA, patient organizations, and physicians. First, you will hear from Nina Brame. Nina works with the scientific review staff in the FDA's Office of Therapeutic Biologics and Biosimilars to review biosimilar applications. She is an expert on the development of safe and effective biosimilars, insights into the approval process, and interchangeability. Second, you will hear from Sarah Eikenberry, also of the FDA. Sarah is a senior communication advisor for the FDA Office of Therapeutic Biologics and Biosimilars. She supports the agency's work on strategic priorities and education for biosimilars. Third, from the provider perspective, you will hear from Dr. Russell Cohen. Dr. Cohen is a renowned gastroenterologist, a professor of medicine, and director of the Inflammatory Bowel Disease Center at the University of Chicago. In his work, he has deep clinical expertise using biosimilars in the inflammatory bowel disease, Crohn's disease, and ulcerative colitis. And fourth, you will hear from Pam Traxel, the Senior Vice President in Alliance Development and Philanthropy at the American Cancer Society Cancer Action Network. Pam advocates for biosimilars use in cancer treatment and will speak to that patient experience. We're really excited to share these insights with you, and I will now kick it over to Nina for her insights from the FDA regulatory perspective. Thank you, Nina.
Thank you for that kind introduction. So we're excited to give you a high-level overview of these products, so let's just jump right in. Next, please. What are biosimilars? It may be helpful to start with an analogy to generics, which I'm sure you're more familiar with. So biosimilars are to original biological products as generics are to original drug products. So they're both abbreviated pathways, but they each have distinct regulatory requirements that support their approval. Next. So I'm not equating drugs with candy, but in this case, we thought a jelly bean analogy might be a helpful way to think of these products and some concepts. So think of one jelly bean as a molecule and one packet of beans as a pill. So for some small synthetic drug products, it's easier to copy the active ingredient and have it be the same as the brand. So from a quality perspective, even if the generic and brand differ in some ways, like the shape of the pill, small minor ways like that, the brand and the generic have the same active ingredient. In this example, that would be a yellow jelly bean. So you can expect the same performance from a generic as you would the brand product. And it's that similar concept for biosimilars as well. Next. So let's talk about some basics of biologics in case you're less familiar with this product class. Biologics are a different type of medicine. They come from bacteria, yeast, or other living systems, and that's different from conventional medicines like small molecule drugs. So if you think about a tablet of aspirin, where the active ingredient is chemically synthesized and shown on this figure, compare that to other biologics you may have heard of, like insulin, erythropoietin, or some other monoclonal antibody like Humira or Rituxan. So one fundamental takeaway from this talk should be that generally biologics are made differently than those chemically synthesized drugs, and they're also larger and they range in size, as you can see here. Next. To manufacture these biologics, cells are programmed to make a protein of interest. And this is a multi-step process. So trying to illustrate the process on this slide, the left panel is showing that generally the protein framework, like the amino acid sequence, is the same throughout. So those are copied and programmed. But along the way of manufacturing, these proteins can get add-ons or modifications such that most of the molecules might look like the version of the molecule on the left, but slightly different versions of each molecule can exist in a solution. So even though a majority might look like the one on the left, there may be a small fraction that look like the variant on the right. And you can look at the arrow or the bracket to kind of highlight what some small differences in those modifications may be. So I hope this illustrates that there's some inherent variability in these products. And if we return to the jelly bean analogy, you can think of it as instead of being all one color jelly bean, there might be a mix. But the takeaway is that although variation is expected in these products, that variation is controlled and a consistent mix of variants is kept across batches and over time. Next. So why aren't we using the same terms for biosimilars as we do for generics? Well, as I mentioned on the previous slide, there's some inherent variability. That means these products aren't so easily copied. These are complex mixtures, so biosimilar sponsors aim to match the reference product as best they can, keep as consistent a mixture as they can as compared to the original biological product. Next. So how does FDA determine biosimilars to be acceptable for approval? Next. Biologics are submitted to the FDA and approved as one of two types of biologic license applications. A 351A application contains all the information and data necessary to demonstrate that that product is safe, pure, and potent. The BPCIA created an abbreviated licensure pathway for biosimilars and interchangeables, and those products are submitted and approved as 351K BLAs. Next. A reference product, well, first let me go over some key definitions from the BPCI Act. I'll be using these terms throughout my portion of the talk, so it's helpful to straighten them out from the get-go. A reference product is the single biological product already approved by the FDA under that 351A pathway I mentioned. And it's usually this product that a proposed biosimilar is comparing themselves to in various ways. A biosimilar product needs to meet two key statutory standards. First, it must be highly similar to, and then secondly, it has to have no clinically meaningful differences from the reference product. An interchangeable is a biosimilar product, so it meets those same biosimilarity standards, but it's also expected to produce the same clinical result as the reference in any given patient, and it can be substituted for the reference because switching between this product and the reference wouldn't increase safety risks or decrease effectiveness. Next. It might be helpful to compare and contrast the the standalone pathway versus the biosimilar pathway. So for the standalone development pathway, the goal is to establish from scratch the safety and efficacy of that new product. And that data package is largely based on those big pivotal clinical trials represented by this blue portion of the square. For biosimilars, they meet their standards of approval by a different set of studies because the goals in this developmental space are different. Biosimilars are attempting to show that they are like the reference product. So in a stepwise fashion, this body of evidence is built based on extensive comparisons, analytical and clinical. And in the biosimilar setting, there's no one definitive study that demonstrates biosimilarity. Instead, we're looking at all of the evidence across various sources of information together in totality. And with a limited set of sensitive studies, a biosimilar can be licensed for more than one clinical indication. So the biosimilar pathway is at times described as an abbreviated pathway because the amount of clinical data needed is less than if the standalone pathway were pursued for the same product. And that's important because those big pivotal studies are expensive to run. And in the biosimilar world, there's a scientific basis that supports a limited clinical comparison. And the hope is that this abbreviation may result in a lower cost of development and hopefully a lower cost of the product in general. Next. So let's return to biosimilar expectations and talk about the comparative analytical data. So remember, extensive analytical comparisons make up the foundation of the development program for biosimilars. And this is because analytical studies are generally more sensitive than clinical studies in detecting differences between products should they exist. And the idea is that a product that's highly similar with respect to structure and function to the reference product, that product should behave similarly to the reference product clinically. So that's the basis for this comparative assessment. Multiple lots of each product are compared for many, many attributes. A few of those attributes are listed here, but rest assured, it's a very involved and extensive comparison. Next. As I mentioned before, some type of clinical assessment is also used to support that standard that there are no clinically meaningful differences between the biosimilar and the reference product. So FDA typically expects PK to be compared between the biosimilar and the reference, and in some cases, a study in patients to compare efficacy, safety, and immunogenicity may also be warranted, but not always. So these studies are not considered in the same way as the pivotal studies in the standalone development. As I mentioned, it's a different paradigm. So the goal isn't to establish efficacy and safety, it's just to show that there's no difference. Next, please. All right, let's return to this other designation, interchangeability. So you may have heard of this. For interchangeables, I mentioned earlier that all of the standards that relate to biosimilarity also apply to interchangeability. But in addition to that data, an interchangeable undergoes an additional scientific evaluation to support that it can be substituted for the reference product at the pharmacy level, and that this substitution is okay from a scientific perspective. So for example, in some select cases, a study may be conducted to show that switching between the proposed interchangeable and the reference is no different than using the reference without switching, and that's depicted here in this figure. Next. So this extra evaluation, which may or may not be informed by a formal switching study, is intended to support the pharmacy level substitution for these products. So subject to state law, interchangeables may be substituted for the reference product at pharmacies without the intervention of the prescribing healthcare provider. And so that's why there's that extra evaluation for some of these products, which may not necessarily include a switching study. Next. So let's talk about some key takeaways about biosimilarity. Biological products are generally large molecules. They range in size and complexity. You can expect some variation in these products, and that's all products, reference products, biosimilars, interchangeables, because of the nature of biologics. But the manufacturing process for these products is carefully controlled, so it keeps variation within an acceptable level. The comparative analytical data is the foundation of the biosimilar assessment. it's that piece of the data that supports a proposed biosimilar is highly similar to a reference product with respect to structure and function, and is the most sensitive assessment for differences. A biosimilar manufacturer also needs to show that products have no clinically meaningful differences from the reference product, and there may be some clinical assessment like a PK study, if needed, a patient study that may support that assessment. Next. Some key takeaways about interchangeability. I mentioned these products have the ability to be substituted at the pharmacy without intervention of the prescribing healthcare provider, subject to state law. I do want to emphasize that FDA's approval of an interchangeable doesn't indicate any higher standard of biosimilarity. There are just different statutory criteria and associated different scientific considerations that relate to those designations. And there may also be some other reasons, like business reasons, why sponsors may choose or not choose to seek interchangeability in the first place. So patients and providers don't need to wait for biosimilars to become interchangeable. These approved products are ready for use. Next, please. Patients and healthcare providers can be confident in the safety and effectiveness of a biosimilar and interchangeable product. You can prescribe them by name just as you would the reference biological product. Biosimilars and interchangeables can be used both in patients who are newly diagnosed, treatment naive, or patients who are treatment experienced and were perhaps on the reference product already. It's a decision for patients and providers, but they're available for use in either of these contexts. Interchangeable biosimilars may be substituted, as I mentioned already, but all of these products meet FDA standards for approval. Next, please. And finally, I just wanted to close out with a timeline of our approvals. The green boxes are biosimilars and the purples are interchangeables. And you can see that there's generally more than one biosimilar approved for a given reference product. And all of these products span a variety of therapeutic indications. I did note that those in blue are already marketed. So if you haven't encountered one of these products already, you might in the near future. So it's great that you're here to learn more about them. Next. And with that, I'll turn it over to Sarah Eikenberry, who's going to be speaking more about the outreach and education efforts from FDA. Thank you.
Thank you, Nina, for the introduction and your informative presentation. So like Nina said, I'm going to talk about FDA's education and outreach efforts for biosimilars, provide a brief overview of the materials and information FDA has released about biosimilar and interchangeable products, and finally review the Purple Book database of licensed biological products. Okay, next slide, please. One of FDA's goals related to outreach and education is outlined in FDA's Biosimilars Action Plan is to develop effective communications to improve understanding of biosimilars among patients, clinicians, and payers. But developing the materials isn't enough. Stakeholder outreach plays a large part in this effort and continues to be a top priority for us. We know that healthcare providers frequently rely on their medical and clinical associations for information, and that patients trust their healthcare providers for medical information and also look to the advocacy and stakeholder groups for information about their condition. Therefore, we rely on these organizations and individuals to also educate their members and patients about biosimilar and interchangeable products. And FDA tries to support these efforts however we can through multi-stakeholder engagement. Next slide. So on this slide is a sample of the educational materials we have released for healthcare providers, including infographics, ads, and website content. We also have fact sheets, videos, and social media outreach that aim to provide information to healthcare providers and patients for that matter. We also released 3 updated fact sheets this July, coordinated with the first interchangeable product approval to help provide more information about interchangeable products. Next slide. We also right now have some materials for patients, including an infographic and a web page. These patient materials use friendly language to build a foundation of basic understanding and also to address topics, concerns, and misconceptions shown to be most important to patients. Some of the topics shown to be important to patients include highlighting the similarities of biosimilars and biologics, including a comparison of treatment benefits to the original biologics, highlighting the benefits of increased access, ensuring that people understand FDA's efforts to make sure these products are safe and effective, and then also urging patients to find out more information from FDA and their doctors. And in this slide, we've also wrapped up testing additional materials with patients that we look forward to releasing later this year. Next slide, please. This is a snapshot of our Spanish materials that we have, which include two of our most popular infographics, the biosimilar basics and what is a biosimilar, in addition to the biosimilars patient website and our FDA consumer update are also translated into Spanish. This helps us expand information about biosimilars, increase awareness among Spanish-speaking patients and healthcare providers. We're also looking into translating our materials into more languages. Next slide, please. So this is one of our newest sort of packets of information that we've released, which is our biosimilar curriculum toolkit that we launched in December. This toolkit was developed after a limited analysis of professional degree programs and after speaking with faculty and curriculum developers in medical, pharmacy, and nursing schools to understand current biosimilar topic coverage in professional coursework and training. These new educational materials were designed to meet the needs described by the programs and faculty. And so the goal of the toolkit is to increase knowledge and real-world application of concepts among students in healthcare professional degree programs. And the materials in the toolkit are divided into two levels. Level 1 that provides a high-level overview of foundational biosimilar topics, and level 2 that provides a more in-depth look at scientific and regulatory information. Okay, next slide, please. So the materials in the toolkit complement each other, so instructors can select the resources that best fit the knowledge needs and the learning styles of their students. A guide for teaching faculty outlines all of this, including the available materials and the content. And the toolkit contains multiple types of materials and resources to assist teaching faculty, including slide decks, information sheets, case studies, discussion questions, videos, and exercises. All right, so now I'm going to switch gears and to our next slide and give you some information about the Purple Book database. I'm going to try not to go through too quickly. There's a lot of information, but in the interest of time, I might speed through a couple of points. However, I think these slides will be disseminated to people in the audience, and therefore you can go back and look at them. And if you have any questions or want to learn more about the Purple Book. So this database provides the public with an easy to use online search engine with information about FDA licensed biological products that are both regulated by the Center for Drugs, including licensed biosimilar and interchangeable products and the reference product, and information about FDA licensed allergenic, cellular and gene therapy, hematologic and vaccine products that are regulated by our sister Center for Biologics. And you can find this at purplebooksearch.fda.gov. And so on the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about the Purple Book features, which include simple and advanced search options, a glossary of terms, links to product labels, the ability to search, filter, and sort information depending on the needs of the user. And so you can just do anything from simply just look up a product really quickly to dive down a rabbit hole of information that you can find in the advanced search. And so there's a user guide that really goes into the various types of uses of it and can help whether you're a patient, a healthcare provider, manufacturer, researcher. Okay, and let's see, next page, please. All right, so the simple search is the default search bar on the Purple Book homepage. And so this search function is designed for people who may be looking for information about a specific biological product, usually the general public or a patient that might want to just look at something really quick. So this example shows you the auto-populated result list that appears as you begin typing the non-proprietary name etanercept. So you can also search for the brand name, like you could put Enbrel in and you see it's the top entry there. A link to advanced search is located directly under the simple search box, which is over, oh, I think that might be on the wrong one, maybe not. It's over on the right, but the search function allows users to view additional product information and apply filters that refine product searches. And then on the left side of the web page, you see the site navigation pages. There's FAQs that provide detailed information on using, navigating, and interpreting the database. There's a patent list page, which allows users to view information about patents listed in the Purple Book, as well as the table of patent information provided to FDA for certain licensed biological products, and their download Purple Book data feature, which allows users to view monthly reports and then include any changes in product data for the selected month and the entire contents of the Purple Book for that month. And so you can download those in CSV or Excel formats, and there's more information that explains how to do that if you want to take a deeper dive into the various downloads. Next page. Okay, so this is the simple search results page that kind of follows along with the simple search example from the previous slide. So when you click etanercept or Enbrel from, or no, this one we clicked Erelzi from the auto-populated list, it takes you to the results page for the selected product, as seen in the page heading of the image to the right side of the slide. The simple search results page for the selected product includes all biological products that share a core name, which means like biosimilar, interchangeable, reference, and related biological products. And then matching card colors indicate a biological product is biosimilar to or interchangeable with a reference product. And from the simple search results page, users can navigate to advanced search to view additional information about all biological products that share a core name. And as seen on the enlarged image to the left, each product card displays a basic set of information that includes product presentation icons and a link to the product label. And by hovering over the product presentation icons, users can access additional information about the dosage form, the product presentation, and the strength. The label takes users to drugs at FDA page, to the drugs at FDA page for CDER regulated products, or the National Library of Medicine's Daily Med website for CBER regulated products. And for products where a label is not available, for example, it's a revoked product, the product label link will not be active. Next page, please. So clicking a product card on the simple search results page takes you to the product details page. This page provides individual product specific details about the selected product. Following our example, the product details page for Erelzi allows users to quickly see additional information about these products, about this product. So that you can see that the product is licensed under 351K of the PHS Act under license type. And if you look below the individual product rows, the reference product proper name, the reference product proprietary name are shown. And lastly, the status column allows users to see at a glance if an individual product has been discontinued by the manufacturer. And finally, next slide, we'll talk about the advanced search. And the advanced search provides a comprehensive results for search biological products. So the table updates in real time and displays all the product that match any of the terms entered in the search bar. A scroll bar, at the bottom of the table allows users to view a large amount of product information at one time. The navigation bar at the top left allows users to show or hide data columns based on information needed for whatever you're looking for. And so there's 14 default data columns and 14 additional columns that can be selected or unselected from the searchable drop-down list. And so, for example, users can select columns to view information such as the BLA number, interchangeable approval date, and other information. And you can also, at the top left, apply additional search filters, export the data, save print the page, or view the rows and card view and expand the table to full screen mode. All right, then next slide. So finally, I'm going to circle back to our education materials and just talk a little bit about like what we're working on in the future. So stay tuned. We're very excited that we're working on CE content for practicing nurses, pharmacists, PAs, and doctors with Medscape. And we are looking forward to expanding the availability and types of CE material available to practicing healthcare professionals. I think I touched before on the fact that we're going to be releasing some more patient materials this year. We're looking forward to getting out more accessible information to patients in video and text formats and web and social media. And we're going to continue to revise material as needed and look for new opportunities to educate about biosimilars. Okay, and the next slide is just a link to resources for more information about biosimilar and interchangeable products, including the Purple Book and Drugs at FDA, Cedar Learn, and then I think in like a slide or two down, there's also additional resources for your reference in the future. So now I'm going to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Cohen, who will provide the provider perspective on biosimilars.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Sarah and Nina and the entire group. And thanks for asking me to talk. I know a lot of times you don't get the provider perspective. Just for a little background, I'm director of the Inflammatory Bowel Disease Center at the University of Chicago, and I've actually been working mostly in Europe with biosimilars and policy since around 2014, 2015, and then in the US. I see patients every single day, and we have a huge practice for Crohn's and colitis that are on biological therapies. So, I think one of the questions that is thrown at me often is, well, how do I address the topic with my patients? And, knowing what I do, and I often will, when I start someone on a therapy that has a biosimilar, such as infliximab, or shortly will, such as adalimumab, I let the patients know straight out, that basically these medications went off patent, and you may have heard of Remicade or Humira, but in reality, what happens is that your insurance company may have negotiated with the manufacturer that it has a different name, but it's still essentially the same drug. The safety, the efficacy, immunogenicity, everything has been proven and certified by the FDA to be called a biosimilar, and it shouldn't matter. And I think it's helpful to be that straight across and even planting it ahead of time. So my patients now who are on Humira, I say to them, starting in 2023, there's going to be biosimilars to Humira. I say this is what it means. So if it does turn out that your insurance wants you to switch to one of the biosimilars, that's fine. Just straight across, because it is. And one of the things that I also bring across is the purpose is to, I explained it's to decrease cost to healthcare systems. Now, one of the topics that you may or may not discuss later is about whether the patients actually see that cost reduction, which is something that you should consider seriously if you want them to accept the fact that now there's costs to the system that are being saved, but they're not getting it. Nevertheless, subsequently, we actually have our own inpatient pharmacy. I'm at the hospital, University of Chicago. We do have outpatient sites. So we have infusion centers, but as you probably know, a lot of infusions can't be done on site, or at least after the first month. And we have ones who handle the injectables and novel small molecules. So when I start a patient, me or my team actually notify the pharmacist staff, this is what we're starting, this is the indication, this is what they failed already, and this is why I want to do it. So for example, let's say I have a patient who happens to have Crohn's disease and psoriasis. So those are patients where I'd say, well, because they have both, I would want to use Stelara in those individuals. Or if I have a patient who have ulcerative colitis and rheumatoid arthritis, then I would go with an anti-TNF, or subsequently, or maybe even with a JAK inhibitor if they have already gone through a TNF. So providing that simple stuff, I think it makes it very easy for our pharmacists to know what information to put in for the approval. Now, as far as biosimilars go, typically I just say whatever version of adalimumab, well, with biosimilar yet, so let's say infliximab that their insurance covers, that's fine. As far as that's new starts, as far as changes, our pharmacy, or let's say we use infusion centers that are in the neighborhood, the suburbs or far away, who don't have any connection to the University of Chicago, we have to still send the orders there. So they might indicate to me, oh, the patient's insurance now requires Inflectra for their instead of Remicade or Renflexis or Avzola, whatever it may be. As that's fine, knowing what we do about biosimilars, they're all FDA approved biosimilars for infliximab, Remicade, which is fine. One of the things that we try to do is we have inpatient starts on biological therapies, and working with our pharmacy, we'll often try to find out which of the right now we only have the infliximab biosimilars. Which of the infliximab biosimilars does their insurance cover? So this way, we can ideally start them off with Inflectra or with Renflexis. Now, it's probably going to get a little more complicated as you get more and more, and I understand there's issues about stocking them. It's probably not the end of the world if they start with one and then switch to the other, because we already do that, but just trying to make it easier and less confusing, particularly for the patients. So moving forward about concerns of providers. So probably the basic concern I see are patients who are doing well. So one of the rules in medicine is that if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So sometimes it's hard to convince providers to say, oh, now, your patient's doing great. So remember, because if a patient's doing great, there's only two things that can happen. They can either do the same or get worse. They can't get better. So you're going to be blamed for them getting worse. So it has to convince their providers that, these are FDA approved biosimilars. There have been multitude of switch studies done in various indications, including Crohn's and colitis, which have shown it to be fine. And that point I meant at the end of this is another concern of gastroenterologists is called extrapolation. None of the FDA approved infliximab or adalimumab biosimilars had their primary studies that led to their approval in Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis. They were typically in psoriasis, rheumatoid arthritis. So the extrapolation to cover Crohn's and ulcerative colitis, which has been granted, there's sometimes pediatrics didn't get it just yet, but in adults certainly to the approved biosimilars, is important to explain that given the disease state and what we know, and subsequent studies, mostly in Europe, there hasn't been a problem with that too, but you might get some resistance with that. Another concern that providers are going to have is, are we going to end up having the biosimilar of the month club? And, because every time there's a change, there's a million phone calls to my nurse. And I like my nurse. I want to keep her. It's going to be that every 6 months that they're all of a sudden, or every year, because someone got a better deal, that there's another switch and another switch. And I advise against doing that, because if providers are in the situation where there's all the time, once they use something with a biosimilar, that it's going out of control, they'll just prescribe a medicine that doesn't have a biosimilar, because it's better not to get a million calls and all that time frame, that time spent explaining things just for cost savings, which neither the provider or the patient sees. I want to point out that the FDA, and there was a wonderful presentation, clearly has guidance for switching from a reference product to a biosimilar, but there is no guidance on switching between biosimilars. That's not covered by the FDA guidelines. It's not supported by the PK or PD studies. I know that there are experiences doing that, but once you start switching between biosimilars, unless you have that FDA approval, you are actually just experimenting on the patients. And while you say, oh, well, it shouldn't matter because they're both approved biosimilars, that's not necessarily true. If you give the reference products, such as Remicade, a 1.0, then let's say Inflectra may have a range where it can go from a 0.85 to 1.20 and still within the reference range of that the FDA accepts. But what about Renflexis? Perhaps compared to Remicade, it's still within that range, but compared to Inflectra, it's not. So you can't make this up. And I know everyone's getting very excited about all the different biosimilars and flipping each month, but in reality, until we have guidance, switching between biosimilars is experimenting on people. And also you're going to, again, lose the trust of the providers who say, you told us to trust you about switching patients from the reference drug to the biosimilar with the FDA behind it. Don't now turn around and start messing things up and moving things around. Some of the other concerns for the injectables is whether the delivery system will be the same. Will it hurt more? Maybe it'll hurt less. Whether the needle delivery system is going to be the same for the injectable biosimilars. And of course, the patient assistance plans need to be the same. Patients with private insurance currently pay $5 for their biologics and novel small molecules. Can't change that. If you do, we'll find something else that gives them $5, because even though you think the patient can spend $3,000 a month, they can't. And then I actually also think to providers, and it's helpful to have an automated system where you can see what is approved by the plan, what is the criteria for the patients to get on the therapy, right in front of you on a computer. We've actually been using computers for many years. Click, 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 should be done and approved. If it turns out there's a denial, and then the denial, and then we can explain why we want someone, let's say they denied infliximab. Well, it turns out the patient has MS, so they can't get infliximab. Okay, this should be a 48-hour turnaround time, 72 at the most, not 3 to 4 months. Okay, really, we can't rely on fax machines in this situation. And then, there's also the final thing is the concern of the patients. So the patients they really want to make sure that they are getting what I want them to get. Now, again, I'm a big supporter of biosimilars, but at the same time, they want to make sure that they're getting what we want. So explaining to them that this is an FDA-approved biosimilar is fine. Switching around things behind people's backs isn't. There's a mention about interchangeability, which depending on state laws, you may not need a healthcare provider approval to switch. I would very highly advise against doing that. You have a workflow already in place for your biosimilars, because virtually none of them are interchangeable. Only 2 were on that list that were shown. I would suggest you keep that, because if you start all of a sudden, a doctor gets told that, so they just changed my medicine without telling you, that is a big time problem. You're going to send yourself down the spiral you don't want to go, because we'll just pull the patient, we'll put them on something else, and we'll not go back to that product. So don't make separate rules for separate things. Keep the patient and the physician being to be notified that you want to make this change, and that it's approved by them, even if theoretically it doesn't need to be, because that way the doctor-patient relationship is still established, and it's not just that you have a company that is beholden to its stockholders changing plans all the time. Again, I'd like to thank you for including me in this. I realize that I may have said things that maybe not everybody wanted to hear, but I think it is important to know that the providers, and I'm a very progressive provider on biosimilars, really need to be involved in this and not be on the sideline. So now I'm going to introduce Pam Traxel, who will take it from here.
Thank you so much. Excited to be with you all today to talk about cancer patients and biosimilars, and represent a little bit of the patient perspective here. So next slide. So I think what's really important to understand is there's some data on this slide from the fine folks at IQVIA. What we see here on the far right column is the share of uptake as of September 2021. And what you will note is that oncology biosimilar uptake is actually pretty high, in the 60+% range. Obviously, other classes of biosimilars are not experiencing as much market share. But certainly from an oncology perspective, we are seeing increased market share. And so let's go to the next slide. So what does this mean? So Cardinal Health actually did a really great report. If you're really interested in biosimilars, I highly recommend that you read it. They did a survey of oncologists, and the majority of oncologists had prescribed one of these 3 biosimilars in the past year. For those of you that are not in the oncology community, these drugs represent kind of the backbone of oncology care. So these are not, kind of minor drugs in the oncology space. So from my perspective, we are seeing a lot of cancer patients have some really great experience with biosimilars. But let's talk about what this really means for patients. So let's go to the next slide. I know that I checked the attendees list and I see a bunch of my fellow patient advocates on the phone. I think the thing that's really important for us to think about is, what does this mean in terms of cost, and what does this mean for patients? So in 2018, cancer patients paid nearly $5.6 billion in out-of-pocket costs. And as you can see from the slides here, cancer costs are expected to dramatically increase through 2030, reaching a 34% increase and $245 billion, that's B with a billion dollar expense. So obviously we have a real challenge here for patients to be able to afford their cancer care, which is, let's go to the next slide, which is why insurance is so critically important to our patients. We all know that insurance coverage is critical for all patients to keep the costs down. We've done some work here to model out for Kathy, a sample lung cancer patient, the difference between her out-of-pocket costs with an individual marketplace plan versus no insurance. The one thing I think we all know is that insurance is critical towards affording cancer care and all serious disease. As you can see here, without insurance, Kathy's out-of-pocket costs would be nearly $140,000. Next slide. And so we think about this too, because patient out-of-pocket costs vary widely depending on their insurance type here. So what you can see across the bottom for this sample patient, Brian, is that across 5 different types of insurance, out-of-pocket costs vary widely. And so as patient advocates, one of the things that we want to do is really inform our patients about what is the best way to manage through their disease, while obviously trying to do the best they can to minimize their out-of-pocket costs. Which is why the American Cancer Society at ACS CAN is such a huge supporter of biosimilars. And so let's go to the next slide here. So we did a study for a patient, Carla, a breast cancer patient. This is where a lot of oncology biosimilars currently exist. As you can see here from this slide, Carla's experience for both her and her plan would be if she was on a targeted therapy for her stage 3 breast cancer, the cost to her and in her insurance company would be nearly $75,000 over a 2-year period. Now, if we took Carla and had her access a biosimilar, those overall costs would decrease by 21%. This is critically important. I think we all know that affording care is a very important part to helping patients survive disease. And for us, biosimilars represents an important cost savings, which is why we're so incredibly supportive of the work of the Biosimilars Forum. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Julie.
Thank you, Pam, and just want to thank all of our speakers today. What an incredible bunch and such great work, and just I really, really appreciate you guys participating today. So I think what's really important, as you heard from all of us, and you know, in the speakers and all the members of the forum, and also, as Pam said, the patient groups, the physicians across the board, to really help biosimilars, but to help the patients. And I think that's so important, because that is the promise of the whole biosimilars environment, is to lower cost and increase access for patients. So we have something very important for all of us to do and to take action. One, educate. Every one of us can be an educator on biosimilars, and we're happy at the forum to help if you need more expertise or educational materials. The other piece is to advocate. Advocate for biosimilars to be used on formularies and to be offered to patients. Advocate for lower cost. Patients and families need a lower cost, especially now. And then use biosimilars, as Dr. Cohen said, as Pam said, as the FDA assured us that biosimilars are safe and great lower cost options for patients. Use them. If you're a physician or you're a healthcare provider or a pharmacy, drive for the uptake of biosimilars, drive for access and use. So I want to thank everyone, and I believe I'm going to turn it over to Ari. And special thanks to our biosimilars group and Ari and team for putting this on.